Hello, it's Rachel here again. I'm sitting outside in my swing seat. It's very, very relaxing sitting out here. I can hear the birds and the river. It's a little bit breezy, so I hope that the noise from that doesn't stop you from hearing me. And I do apologise if me swinging around like this makes you feel a bit nauseous or dizzy. Actually, I feel a bit nauseous today, so we can all feel nauseous together. Anyway, you can always close your eyes if it makes you feel seasick. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about cognitive dissonance. Most ex-witnesses would have learned what that is and appreciate its effects and how it occurs, but for those who don't know what it is, I'm going to explain it to you. Cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling that a person gets when they're trying to justify believing two opposing things at the same time. It sort of really screws up your head. And it's Jehovah's Witnesses' teachings really set you up for cognitive dissonance. I know I suffered with cognitive dissonance for many, many years as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I think the main problem that I initially identified that caused me discomfort mentally and possibly leading on to physical discomfort too, because when you're suppressing these confused, conflicting ideas in your mind, it does take a toll on you physically. Headaches and stomach aches and anxiety. But yeah, the main thing I found difficulty with was the teaching that the governing body are imperfect men and make mistakes, and they admit to that, but then at the same time they say that you must accept everything they say as if it's coming from Jehovah God himself. So it's two opposing kind of ideas, isn't it? And it just used to drive me insane thinking about this. It was nuts. It seemed like insanity, really. But when you look at the teachings and practices of witnesses, they are full of inconsistencies and contradictions. You can see it in the congregations when you look at the brothers and sisters. You see ones that are very soft, kind, caring, forgiving, understanding people. And then at the other end, you see ones that are very strict, harsh, by the book, unyielding. Yeah, two contrasts. And each of them see the truth from their own perspective. Like if you talk to someone who's the first type, the kind and caring, understanding witness, and tell them about ones that are harsh and cruel, they won't believe you. They think everyone's like them, and the other way around, it seems. So you get two different extremes in the one religion. And that's kind of understandable when you consider that Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on using the whole Bible. They draw lessons from the Old Testament, and in fact the Watchtower study for tomorrow, they're talking about drawing lessons from the cities of refuge arrangement from the Old Testament, and they're drawing lessons from that for Christians today. They used to call them types and antitypes, but now they're just referring to these Old Testament arrangements as lessons from which you can draw principles. But you see, Jehovah's Witnesses live by the Old Testament as much as they do the New Testament, But these two things don't really go together. I mean, it's something that I found a lot of difficulty with, and I'm sure a lot of current witnesses must do as well, where it's hard to equate Jesus and what he taught and how he taught people to live with the way Jehovah instructed the Israelites to live. You know, they had that very elaborate law code with not only the Ten Commandments, of course, but about 600 odd other laws that were given. And their lives were very ritual focused. You know, they had all the sacrifices at the temple and, you know, so many rituals. And the morality was so different too. Yet it's confusing because the scriptures say that Jesus only does what he sees his Father doing and teaches what his Father teaches. And it says that Jehovah God does not change. Yet why are his requirements so different from the Old Testament to the New Testament? Especially when it comes to morality, I think. One thing that used to disturb me is the way women were treated and viewed by the nation of Israel. For example, a man could have multiple wives and concubines as well, and that was acceptable. But it wasn't okay for a woman to have multiple husbands. And you have to wonder, how would the emotional, the physical, the need for intimacy, you know, how would those needs be met for a woman who was in a relationship with a man who had, well, even up to hundreds, like King David and Solomon had hundreds of wives. Well, actually, I don't know how many King David had, but Solomon certainly had hundreds of wives and concubines. I mean, gosh, how much sex do they need? I don't understand it. So it just seemed very harsh for the woman. You know, I couldn't understand it. That was acceptable to Jehovah. I mean, we wouldn't think that was acceptable today. But God doesn't change, so I don't know. I know the part of the explanation, I guess, that people will say is that many wives meant many children, and it meant growth of the nation, so I don't know. Another thing that used to bother me was in the Old Testament, if a man, and he could be a married man, had sex with a virgin girl who's unbetrothed to a man and not married, hence she's still a virgin, then he hadn't committed any crime. What he had to do, though, was to marry her. So if he had sex with her, if he bought the goods, tasted the goods, he had to buy them. You know, he had to look after her as a wife and add her to his harem of multitude of other wives, probably. If he just couldn't keep it in his pants, you know, he could just add to his family, as provided he could provide for the woman. So, but on the other hand, if he went and had sex with another man's wife, or a virgin who was betrothed to another man, who was engaged to another man, so she was the possession of another man, then he would be put to death for having sex with her. So it was, you know, the having sex with the woman wasn't the problem. It was if she belonged to somebody else. So women seem to be more like possessions rather than people. I hope you can still hear me. And that's you know, today that would be considered quite unacceptable, at least in our culture and Western civilization. And I wonder how many women, Israelite virgins, ended up having to marry their rapists. Say if they didn't scream, if they were raped, would they end up having to marry the man who raped them? I imagine that's what they would have had to have done. So, very disturbing. And of course there's all the, when Jehovah commanded the nation of Israel, their armies, to go out and to, conquer their enemies and kill them, plunder their goods, keep their virgins for themselves. Very hard to understand, isn't it? Very hard to understand the mentality, and how could these people go out and do that? Can you imagine today Jehovah's Witnesses being asked to go out and kill their enemies? I mean, what kind of mindset would you have to be able to do that? I mean, could they do that? Ooh. Doesn't bear thinking about, really, does it? I know a lot of them would just love to get their hands around the necks of apostates or run them through with a sword. You get quite a few comments on Facebook from, I don't, but I have seen them from brothers, especially, in lands like in the African lands, who talk about killing apostates. So it's horrible, but this kind of attitude is far removed from what was taught in the Christian Greek scriptures, wasn't it, where Jesus said to put away the sword, and he was peaceful. So yet God doesn't change. So these things were acceptable in the Old Testament, but they're not really acceptable in the Christian congregation. Yet Jehovah's Witnesses still go to the Old Testament to draw lessons. So it's extremely confusing and conflicting. Like tomorrow's Watchtower study, I haven't gone through it thoroughly. I've just read little bits here and other people's commentaries about it, talking about the cities of refuge and the disfellowshipping, the Judicial Committee procedure that Jehovah's Witnesses follow today. And of course, there is no support for this procedure in the Christian writings. There's nowhere that it says that there should be a 3-man judicial committee, a panel of 3 judges set up to try a fellow Christian in secret. There is nothing in the scriptures to support that. So they must draw lessons from the Old Testament. Even there, they don't follow through properly. Sure, there were judges, but a person was tried in public, not in secret, where a miscarriage of justice could take place. In the Old Testament, people were tried by the judges in the gates. That meant that where people were passing, people could see, they could watch and observe, see what was said. People could come forward who might have some evidence to the contrary that might exonerate that person, or they might be witness against that person. But that doesn't happen in the congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses. They have this secret behind closed doors meetings. And the Elders Handbook says that the person should not have anyone else come with them as a witness to the proceedings or as moral support. And the only exception is if it's a sister and her husband is a brother, and I think because it's his wife, his possession, then he's allowed to attend. But yeah, there's no scriptural basis for the 3-man Judicial Committee, nor is there any scriptural basis for the reinstatement process, which is extremely humiliating. And these men on the Judicial Committee, who are the ones that decide whether someone can be reinstated, they're really playing God, aren't they? And it's real people they're dealing with, people with emotions, with feelings, with families, and these are very affected detrimentally by these processes that Jehovah's Witnesses have made up for themselves. It's crazy, isn't it? Jesus taught mercy and forgiveness, yet we see that with this disfellowshipping and reinstatement process, that mercy and forgiveness is not at the forefront, is it? It's legalism. It's really following more the pattern of the Pharisees of the first century, not the pattern that Jesus left, and even not what the first century Christian writers stated either. So it's no wonder that Jehovah's Witnesses suffer a great deal of cognitive dissonance, and not only stems from what the governing body teaches. They speak out of both sides of their mouth. They say one thing, and in the same breath they say the opposing thing. You can see it in some magazines sometimes. In one paragraph there'll be one statement made, and then later on in the paragraph something that seems to say the opposite. So I imagine only a lot of witnesses just glaze over. They don't actually think very much about what they read in the literature or what they hear from the platform. They just their brains are asleep, and they don't often pick up on these inconsistencies and contradictions. But they're right there in front of their face. If they just wake up their brain. It's a bit sad, really. But of course, it goes deeper than the cause of this cognitive dissonance with Jehovah's Witnesses goes deeper than just what the governing body teach. I mean, what they teach is a symptom of what the Bible teaches. I mean, because there's, like I was saying earlier, the scriptures state that God doesn't change, and Jesus reflects perfectly his Father. So why do we see such a difference between Christian standards and the standards of the nation of Israel? Why? It is so confusing for people. So that alone sets you up for cognitive dissonance and this really uncomfortable feeling. And maybe this is why a lot of witnesses are asleep mentally, because they can't make sense of it, and it screws their mind over thinking too much about it. And the potential ramifications of being cut off from your family if you actually say anything about it are just too much to even think about. So they just switch off their minds and just go with the flow on autopilot and just hope it all goes away. So anyway, I hope that's made sense. But I may make another video tomorrow if I do my car unwitnessing, which I'm thinking I will do tomorrow. Okay, bye for now.